Welcome to Revive Ministry Podcast. This month's theme is healing our communities, which dives into the question, how can I help? Whether you are someone who is a caretaker, someone who is suffering through um, difficulties, the strong community can really do a lot of great things. However, on the other side of it, it also can be a big barrier. Today, we have a new guest. Her name is Phyllis, right? I didn't ask you. Phyllis Leavitt?
Leavitt. Leavitt.
Leavitt. Thank you so much for coming on. Really, this month we've been talking about community, and I'm just so grateful to have your insight and your input when we dive deep into this. All right.
Thank you.
Before I go in, obviously, just want to share those in the States. 988 is a suicide crisis lifeline. I do encourage you, if you are having thoughts, or I encourage you to talk to someone. As adults, it's kind of hard for us to ask those three words in a row, I need help. So I encourage you, as a coworker or person at church, at your mosque, wherever you congregate, I encourage you to find that person that you can share a little bit more about how you really are doing, not what's on our surface, not what our persona is telling everyone else what we are. So I encourage you to take. I think those around the world, if you're not in the States, find what services are there if you are facing crisis. Then again, thank you again, Phyllis, for coming on. I always start with people saying it better than I do. Angela Dankworth says it. Duckworth says it this way: enthusiasm is common, endurance is rare. I used this quote last month, but I feel it's so telling. I want to hear your input. What do you think when you hear this quote?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great quote, and I haven't heard it before. I think enthusiasm is like our spark of inspiration and the drive to, see your vision come into fruition, and to create change or something new. And it usually, like, there's just a lot of energy around the enthusiasm, and then the rubber meets the road, and there's the hard work. And there's like the day after day grind sometimes to put something in place. And not only just the hard work that is often required to, bring a vision into reality, but the obstacles that can come up, people who aren't supportive, or you start to doubt yourself, or you don't think you can make it to the finish line. And there's the desire to, like, maybe give up or think that you're not capable or whatever. So, like, I think it can be outer influences that may or may not be supportive, and it can be inner influences that was like, what was I thinking? Why did I take this on? Kind of thing. So I think perseverance, I think of as endurance. And I think perseverance is sometimes a quality that people, including myself, just need to, like, represencing over and over and over again.
I think it's like an ongoing thing. It's not something we actually get to. I always tell my clients when working in the mental health field, don't be the mayor of nothing. Don't be the like, honestly, put yourself. We are so hyper critical. I remember when I was really suffering from mental health issues in the past. The biggest thing I tried to do is to explain what I was going through, and that was always it never made me feel well. It made me feel the stigma even harder. And what I realized, the big insight I learned through the endurance, was people don't have to understand what I've gone through. They can still be supportive. It's not a requirement, but it's weird that feels that way. Especially in mental health communities, we're usually talk about more maintaining than actually health. When we think about mental health, we're always like, not everyone, but I'm saying there's a lot of stigma. There's over explaining a lot of times when you're talking about what you're going through. And sometimes the endurance, if you're not carrying all that weight, it does get a little bit easier. I remember when I was able to it's unrealistic for me to explain every single thing. No one ever does that for most illnesses that they go through. So I do feel when I listen to this quote, it reminds me of that simple lesson that people can support me whether they understand me or not. It's not required.
Right. Right. I think that's true. And sometimes it's important to have one place where you really can explain what you're going through, you know.
Yeah,
Right.
you don't bottle it in. It doesn't. That doesn't
Right.
help.
Right.
That
Right.
cathartic. I always find it more like, obviously there's a lot of self care coping skills, but I always find the creative ones to be a little more helpful for me. Like some
Mm,
really dive deep in, like the grounding techniques I work with my clients with, and all that stuff can be helpful at the moment, but something personal that I can kind of dive in when I'm going through those moments when I don't feel I'm doing well, but endurance wise, I am. It's just this, the
mm,
enthusiasm can be kind of shaken at times, if that makes sense.
mhm. What were the creative things that you're talking about? Like what kind of thing?
I'll do music sometimes. I'll do something like writing. I will just, a lot of times I do video, audio text. So I do a lot of video editing. It's just cathartic for me. So like a long day, that's rest for me. If that makes sense.
And I say that all the time too. Like sometimes talking to a therapist is just the right thing, or a really close, safe friend or partner. And sometimes it's just doing what we love.
Yeah.
For me, sometimes therapy is going out in my garden. like.
hmm I know for me during the I guess the peak of COVID, there was this one park near the university. I just loved. Me and my wife will just go walking, and that was my therapy. Just because there's less people and we're all trying to be, social distancing at that point. That was the one time I felt I could get out of the house at
Right,
that time.
right.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I think this quote is great, and a lot of times when we think about community, it is these breaks of understanding. I think um, get it all done in one swoop, the whole one stops one shop kind of mentality can really be a barrier in itself when we don't achieve it.
Right.
When not everything gets done the way we like. Any
You know
thoughts that we mentioned or anything you want to add? I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
don't
I
want
just
to.
no, no, that's great. I wanted to add that when I was writing my book, I had a really wonderful editor that I was working with, and there were definitely moments where I felt like I just wasn't going to be able to finish it. Like it was just too big of a project. I just felt like incapable of getting it all together and the chapters all sorted out and all the research done and everything that I had to do the book. And she had the best piece of advice. So, whatever your vision is, whether it's healing your own body or creating more sense of community in your community or having a better relationship with your children or your spouse or
Mm,
expressing your creativity in music or science or art or whatever, what she said was just come back to your why. Why are you doing this? Because that
mm,
was the original inspiration. Right. I'm
mm.
writing this book because there's something I really want to share with other people. Or I want to learn better communication skills because I want to have a better relationship with my partner. Whatever it is, come back to your why and reignite the original inspiration, because that will fuel the endurance.
I totally agree. I think about some of the less helpful things when we are like blanket statements. Like I should be and the problem with that, I feel it's very insensitive to ourselves because it erases our history. It's not now we're all generically one person that needs to be somewhere at some given age because I feel uncomfortable. And I feel a lot of times with mental health is they used to say it's okay to be not okay. I
Hmm.
also like to say it's messy. Mental health
It's
is
totally
messy.
messy.
Like I don't know like how you go around not being messy. And I feel when we I guess the self-worth is one of the things that are hardest with mental health. Like you're going through it, you get all the support, and like you're saying, you're like I'm not gonna, when you're trying to do that book and you're like I don't think I'll be able to finish it. It's like our brains could even have the rational, like John Green said, there's hope even when your brain tells you there isn't. It's like your brain is saying um and then sometimes the opposite happens. I have all the rational kind of logical reasons. I'm like, this is not, I'm okay. I'm doing okay, but I don't feel okay. I feel like I'm not doing okay. Or even if I say these people are friends of mine, but at my worst, you get kind of stuck. You get stuck because of at times with with I guess in essence emotional regulation. Emotions in itself is not a bad thing. I kind of treat it like a fever. Like when we have a fever, it doesn't mean that fever is bad. Just tells that something's wrong. Something
Right.
may need to be addressed. So I do feel that even if we don't feel it, and that's something I try to be careful with, especially in the
Right.
past, doesn't mean it's not going well. If that makes sense.
That's really true. And I remember someone saying a long time ago that your emotions are not the only test of reality. They're
Hmm.
not. And so you might feel flat, but that doesn't mean you can't take the next step, because right around the corner might be the next flash of inspiration or connection or insight or download of, like, how you're going to proceed. And so it's just keeping on going.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to your book. I always love having you guys share a little bit more about their why. Like you said, why did they do? I sometimes my friends always said before I worked in the mental health field, they're like, Rob, you can talk to anyone. I'm like, I didn't think anything of it, but then I realized I always, when I was in math and trig, I always remember the derivative. I always try to get there quicker with people. Like, what is the main reason we're here?
Right.
I
Right.
can remember times when family members will say, "Look at my son. He's not doing any of this, blah, 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 blah." And I usually let them not be in there because that's not very helpful. But then if I talk to the son and I'm like, "Hey, can I talk to your mom?" I'm like, it's not that you're wrong. He's not doing X, Y, Z. However, I always want that door to be kind of open. I don't want him to feel, and there's a lot of let's try something different because obviously you're here because it hasn't worked. Whatever you try to do and we can be very stubborn. And I feel, that humility, that honesty, and that rawness really helped when we get there. But
Yeah.
sometimes we have these um, preconceived notions that we should be somewhere else, and that could be, I would say, the mirage that is really a barrier in our lives when it comes to whether it's mental health, medically, whatever you're dealing with at any given time. That could be, I guess. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that even though I think we've come a long way, even in
Mm,
my lifespan, in terms of being more vulnerable, I think we still live in a culture that wants, that sort of preaches looking good, being independent. You're a self-made person. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, you do this on your own. You know,
mhm.
and that's the measure of success. And even though I think there is more permission than there used to be vulnerable and say I need help, or I'm stuck, or I don't know where to go from here. I don't think that's really embedded in our culture yet. I think there's still a very strong need to look good and look like you have it together.
I totally, I think there's a lot of exposure that we have now. It's more normalized, the verbiage, but you're right. Even as a leader in church, I just remember the same thing. Like, are we performing? Or are we, the difficult thing about church is like someone may have beat cancer and they're like, praise God, all this stuff. But then I have to remember as a leader that someone down the row in the pew lost someone last week from cancer. So
Right.
it's like, it's
Right.
difficult, the complexities, as simple as it can be. And one thing that really hurts my heart when it comes to just any faith based group or any group is that we sometimes don't take care of our own well,
Right.
period. you
Right.
know the, and we forget that the people right there are the ones doing all the work, and I feel that disconnect, I feel so like technology wise, I feel as much as we have more access, like we have more exposure to mental health verbiage and understanding, and but it doesn't mean we take it. Doesn't mean we actually go that route. It just means that we understand the verbiage, but we have so many means to communicate the same argument, but we're more disconnected than we ever been.
Well,
And that's a
we also have. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
okay. No, go
I was
ahead.
going to say that, while we have more exposure with some of the media and the access to technology, we also have exposure to a lot of things that are very toxic to our mental health. And I
That's
think we have to learn to become more discriminating about what we're feeding ourselves on that level of what we take in and imbibe and embody in ourselves from what we're exposed to, because it's massive what's out there. And I think you have to be selective about what's actually good for you.
And that's why I really think sometimes like self worth is huge, because if you feel like you have self worth, then you could ask the question, which I tried to get to. It's ongoing. How is this serving me? Is this still serving me? Whether it's a relationship, this thing I'm scrolling every single day, I'm waiting for as many likes. Is this still serving me? And if the answer is no, what steps? Because it can be difficult, because it's something that you may find familiar, even though it's not good for you.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
Totally. And so often when people don't have a chance to heal whatever hurt them early on in life, maybe they had a very difficult home life or an abusive or a neglectful parent, or they were bullied at school, or they had a sibling that was out of control and, pouncing on them, or they were sexually abused or whatever happened to them. When
mhm.
those wounds don't get a chance to be healed, we often feel out of control of the poor choices that we're making and then feel shame about it, like, well, why did I choose that partner when I knew he or she wasn't really good for me, but I couldn't say no, and I couldn't get out of it, and I kept trying to make that person love me, or whatever I did that was just
Mhm.
repeating a past. And that I think when people really have a chance to heal some of the wounds that they've endured early on, or the poor conditioning that they've received, or the poor role models that they've embodied in themselves, that then you have a chance to make different choices and healthier choices in your life, and you can feel that self-worth. Because I think it's a real difficult way to it's difficult to feel self-worth when you
Mhm.
feel like you're in the grip of unconscious impulses that aren't good.
I totally agree. It's like, especially, but I guess an easier illustration, someone, trying to battle alcohol addiction. The whole, when it comes to that, the, they used to say simply people, places, things. Like, where do you go at the very simple, but it may be negatively reinforced because I don't want to go to jail. Like maybe it's court ordered or whatever. But the hope is that that negative reinforcements transitions to something positive. That I want to
Yeah,
not drink, or I don't want to use these substances because I want to be around for my granddaughter, or I want to be around for X, Y, Z. And that transition is beautiful, because if you don't just empty out what the bad behavior, bad condition, or bad self care, you fill it with something. You work towards
right,
something in that
right.
regards.
And I
So.
think that part of therapy, or any healing work,
Mhm.
let's just say, that a person does, is that underneath the layers of pain or poor conditioning or bad role models or false beliefs about yourself or whatever, underneath those layers is this beautiful essential person who does have a contribution to make, large or small. It doesn't have to be big, but we all came into this world with something to offer if we find love and safety and support for who we are. And so, the healing process will help unearth what our gifts and our strengths and our talents are. And that can become part of the motivation, to heal, and not just to get out of the pain, which is also a very important motivation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, without further ado, I always have this moment where I just want to give the floor to you. Share. I see the book on this America Therapy. Why did you write it? What drew you to this kind of focus? And what do you think is important for people to kind of, I don't know, in regards to community? Why do you think it's important? I know there's a pack, there's three-parter, but
No, no, it's a
um,
good question, because I love the focus of your month, healing our communities, because in some ways that is the focus of my book. You might say that's, or at least that's one way to interpret the focus of my book. So I've been a psychotherapist, for your listeners, I'll say I've been a psychotherapist for 35 years. And
mhm,
um and I got into that practice because I went to therapy myself to try to heal trauma from my own childhood that was really impacting my life, in a very difficult way. Um, I had a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety and a lot of loneliness. Those were probably my main symptoms, and just kind of feeling stuck. Um, and so when I went to therapy, I began to remember more about what happened to me, and I began to find empathy and compassion for the little girl in me who I had kind of separated myself from, because I didn't want to feel her pain.
Mm.
I became a psychotherapist, and I started working with people, and I realized I wasn't alone at all, that, the difficult childhoods and poor conditioning and scary experiences happen to a lot of people. And that the impact of that can be really devastating on your life. And so if you live in a world that wants you to look good and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you don't feel like you can do it, and you don't know why you can't do it, and that was kind of me, all of a sudden my life began to make sense to me. Oh, I wasn't born flawed. These things happened to me that really frightened me and made me pull into myself. And be very protective, and also very critical of myself, which is one of the sad legacies of not being
Mm.
treated well as a child. And so I had a big aha as I was, working with lots of clients, that if what happened to me in my home and what happened to so many of my clients in their homes or their extended families or small communities had such a devastating effect on them, and they're realizing that there's people all over the world, all over our country and all over the world, who have no access to help, who will
Mm.
never understand why they feel out of control or can't manifest in life the way they really long to, or find the love they're looking for, or express their creativity, um, and who are really suffering, who really are suffering from deep internal pain and have no access to help. And then I think of people who are surviving war, and their children have been killed and their homes have been bombed. And what happens to all these people? They become symptomatic. I was symptomatic. I didn't have the worst symptoms in the world. I think if my body, I say this all the time, if my body had liked alcohol, I probably would have been an alcoholic, but I didn't. So I didn't go that route. And so I sort of white knuckled my way through life for a long time until I went to therapy. And so anyway, the big aha was like, we are creating so much suffering around us. And then we blame the people who we've hurt for their symptoms. We blame them for their addiction. We blame them for their people pleasing. We blame them for their acting out on their own children and spouses, instead of wanting to help them and stop this cycle of intergenerational abuse or neglect or poor conditioning. And so basically the theme of my book is that so then the next big aha is, governments often behave like abusive parents. They feed one person and starve another. They look at some people as inferior and other people as entitled. They often attack, very marginalized, vulnerable populations, and consider them inferior as human beings and not entitled to equal rights or equal opportunities. And these are things that if parents do in their own homes, we consider that abusive, we consider that neglectful, and we consider it a sign of mental unwellness. If a parent was not feeding one of their children, or giving them just enough to keep them alive, and giving good meals to another child, we would say, what's wrong with them? And yet, as larger communities and institutions and governments, we do these things all the time. And like abusive or neglectful parents, we then justify, well, they did this and they don't deserve it, or they're lazy, or they're stupid, or they're inferior because of the color of their skin, or their gender, or their whatever. And so part of my book is really making that correlation between what is a healthy family, how could that impact, how could we look at healthy family dynamics in terms of our country, how could we help bring ourselves back from so much divisiveness and escalating violence to a place where we care for each other, where we have compassion for each other's pain, where we're looking out for our brother and sister human beings, where we provide as much equal opportunity as humanly possible, knowing that none of this is perfect and we can't do it perfectly. But that we're committed to that, the way you would want parents to be committed to that with their children and their spouses. But I say all that in my book, not to blame or shame anyone in the government, in our communities, in our homes, but to talk about how can we find healing?
Yeah.
How can we find healing? How can we change the way we communicate so that we're actually listening to one another, that we're willing to take feedback, that we're willing to give feedback in a nonviolent, constructive way so that we can come together? And I would love to see that in our government, in our bigger institutions, in our justice system, in our
Mm.
places of business, in our houses of worship, in our homes. And it's doable,
Yeah.
if we want it. If we want it.
Yeah. And, listening, I was thinking of a lot of times I try to break it down when a parent gets, our classes in kindergarten, they get this kind of monstrosity, but it's so precious to them. And it's like, it's on their desk and someone's like, what is that? Well, it's the best art ever. So it's funny because we are biased, but when we think about communities, I love what you said because it always starts from home. I think about um in a church setting, if the pastor has or in like an imbalance at home, it feels in the church. It just is when and I feel when we spread out into more of the community, larger community, I do feel there's a lot of and like you, I'm not pointing blame. I'm really just trying to find solutions.
Right, right,
But there is a bit of fear. I feel like that's consuming. And there's less tolerance. There's more. I say more of you're good, you're bad.
right.
There's dualistic kind of view. There's no gray area. There's no willing to understand. There's also this rushness. Like there's no time for anything, but then we don't value our own time. It's kind of this cycle we kind of
Mhm.
get stuck in. And it's not just us, it's like the whole community. I remember this African proverb. I loved it before. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This describes the fundamental roots of community. I'm half Korean, and I remember in South Korea, it's very hard because in the change was drastic. Well, after the U.S. came after Korean War, Korea became from poverty to like first world country, have everything,
Mhm.
and the generation gap is huger. So like they remember, like my grandparents would remember a time very different. So you can't even use years. It has to be. You're talking about like centuries because they didn't have access to what we have now.
Right.
And there's cultural aspects, and so confusing. Just when we think about communities now that we're diverse, but we're diverse separated. We're kind of like in these little pools, and we're not willing either. And it's sad to see. What my biggest concern is not so much there's always going to be greed. There's always going to be war. There's going to be these things. There's going to be people who struggle and who are, but how we treat each other, like Coretta Scott King, is
I love that quote.
it's still really concerning that family members will not talk to each other just because the political view is different. They will
Mhm.
not talk to each other if someone doesn't agree on one stance. There's this absolute kind of conditioning that if you don't believe this, then you're a horrible person. Forgetting the individual that we are growing in our own different and our perspectives. We may learn to your perspective, your angle, but it doesn't define whether. And you see this in communities and families and in their homes, and that for me, when you think about healing community, that's where I feel it's more concerning today in
Yeah,
regards to
I agree.
so
I think it's really sad because I think we actually really want in our own lives, we really want love and connection. We really
yeah.
want to belong safely to other people and love them and be loved by them. But we're sort of being taught to have all these defenses and all these judgments about, like you said, who's good and who's bad, who's right and who's wrong, as if that's going to protect us or get us somewhere, when in fact it just breeds more loneliness, it breeds more anger, it breeds more separation. And and I think that one of the reasons why I wrote my book which is totally from a psychological point of view, because I think that's really the big missing piece today, honestly, our
Mm,
mental
mm,
health. We've been taught to believe that all of this judgment of right and wrong and good and bad and who's worthy and who's not, and if we're entitled to wage war on somebody or kill them or suppress them or deny them their rights, that we're entitled to do that because they're bad people. That we've been taught to believe that these are ideological and partisan issues when they're really mental health issues. Mentally healthy people don't treat each other cruelly. They
mhm,
don't look at other people like they're inferior human beings. Mentally healthy people want to help. Mentally
mhm.
healthy people want to connect. Mentally healthy people support each other to be their best selves. Does it mean we have no boundaries or we can't set firm limits? Of course not. But we can still do that with love. We can still do that with care rather than with hatred and a desire for retaliation or extreme judgment.
I think of Carl Jung, how he describes loneliness. I'm going to paraphrase, but he says it's the inability to share what is important to you. Period. So you think about like a teenager, and we could kind of golf over what their problems are at the time. But if you really want to connect with someone,
Mm,
be interested in what they're interested in.
that's right.
Listen to what they're going through.
Mm,
I feel like if we're really trying to get things improved in a country that's divided, we need to do that versus the latter. We need to start listening and caring about whether you agree with it or not. The
that's
person feeling heard. It's amazing what that does to an individual who probably never gets heard. I remember one time I was with a client, and I said, "Is that okay with you?" And he's like, "Why would you say that? You've been helping me all this time." I said, "When's the last time someone said it was okay with you?" He doesn't remember. That's the problem. Like
right.
the family's trying
Right.
to help, and it's not that. It's just we're conditioned to feel that we just need to have answers. We need to fix this quickly, and there's just this missing element, like you're saying, that I feel is really critical. I was in the Air Force during 2000 2004, and I just remember reading this article, and also the sad part is when we think of people dualistically. If I think a person's a bad person, if we dehumanize each other, we can do heinous things because no longer that person is a
That's
human
right.
being.
That's
And we
right.
know this from history, whether people want to agree to remember or not. But we human beings can do terrible things. I remember there's one soldier, I think his nominate, unknown soldier, would said, "I was to be a good soldier is to not see your enemy as a human, and I'm a good soldier." And then he's like, "God help me," or something in that regard. So it's the dehumanizing we do this, and it's not healthy, like you said. It's something that we are, because if I get to know someone, it's harder for me to do harm. It's just kind of
That's
like there have been studies, like if I get to know what's important, why they do these things, even though I may not agree with it, but human beings really want, they don't want turmoil, they want love at the very basic level. They want to belong, like think of Adler, belonging, his center of focus for him. But also you also, there's this wrestling, internal wrestling, like Jung says a lot about of the internal battles that we have. But the understanding, when we think about communities stretching outside of ourselves, I think it's simple for me, and I'll get your point of your thoughts. It's um it's listening to people's what's important to each individuals, like you would like to be listened to. And if we start just basic there, I think it'll be heading the right direction, my regards.
I say exactly those words all the time, that, what's missing and what we all really want is to be heard We all want to be heard, but we haven't been taught to listen to other people the way we want to be heard. We just,
Mhm.
so often it just devolves into, I want to impose my opinion on you, or my will on you, or my beliefs on you. And one of the beauties of good therapy, and why I think it's such a good role model for what we need in our country, is that when you go to a good therapist, you have somebody who's actually listening to you the way you
Mm.
want to be heard, without judgment, with a desire to help, with some insight, with seeing the best in you and not focusing on on where you've fallen down or where you've made mistakes. And then you internalize that. We internalize that when you get that from another person, and then you're able to give that to yourself, and then you're
Mm.
able to give it to other people. And we have to become those listeners. Yeah, it's we can't wait for somebody else to do it.
Yeah. Uh, and like I said in the beginning, it sounds so backwards. So maybe so for those who are listening, but it was a huge, I would say, paradigm shift to actually realize I didn't have to spend hours upon hours to explain to my family what was going on through with my mental health, for me to feel I was worthy of anything. There was a lot of guilt and shame when you're stuck in there, and so
Right.
that over explaining, that was hypercritical for me to get the first steps towards self worth.
Mhm.
Understanding acceptance that my family loves me the way they can, and they're
Right.
trying to support me. They don't need to understand every single detail, but society's kind of felt that I did. I was not worthy because I was stuck, because I was sick. Even though it's not my choice, it felt like it was a thing that I didn't do enough
Right.
of. There's
Right.
this enoughness. And that's why when you said mental health, people who really suffer mental health, they feel, they know how it feels to be rejected. They know how it feels to be a burden. They know how it feels when they just feel stuck in their brains. They just want, when everyone says, "Oh, just snap out of it. Why don't you?" Oh, they wish they could. Oh, they wish they could snap out of it. But the fact of the matter is, they never feel enough because years go by, and they're like, I just feel like I'm a disappointment. While the communication's not there because the parents are like, I don't know what to do. No one's communicating what's really happening. They're just, oh, I don't want to say that because it'll make him, maybe maybe have that conversation. Maybe
Right.
talk. Maybe be open. No,
Right.
don't assume that because a person's mentally ill that they're incapable. I think that was the most damaging thing, when sometimes people will talk about me around me because they think they are supportive, and not to speak ill, but that was obviously damaging to my self worth, because I'm like, okay, now I hear what they're saying, understand that they're concerned, but this is not helpful. This makes me feel I'm more incapable, in that regard. So I'm just sharing this to those who are listening. When we think about communities, sometimes we may have the right feel like, oh, this will help someone so much, but they have to be a part of it. A
Mhm.
community is about a community. It's not about people who know better to tell people what they need to
Totally.
do.
Totally. Totally, totally. And I think, when people really do their own work on themselves,
Hmm.
they get that imperfection is just part of being human. And you
Hmm.
can have so much more compassion for other people when you can start to embody that compassion for yourself. I'm not perfect. I made a lot of mistakes. If I could go back, I would do certain things very differently with the understanding and the knowledge I have now. But I didn't have it then, you know? And
Hmm.
so, can I give myself credit for the learning that I have done? Can I, for the changes that I've made? Um, and have compassion when people are on their path. They are where they are. They're doing the best they can, and
Hmm.
sometimes they're doing the best they can with not very good resources that they were given.
Exactly. And I wanted to share this one quote, and then we'll get the final thoughts. It's from David Spangler. He says, "Some people think they're in community, but they're only in proximity. True community requires commitment and openness. It is the willingness to extend yourself and encounter and to know the other." That's one of the biggest, I guess, besides what I've mentioned so far. My concern is that we don't even realize it's there. We don't realize that it's something that's right in front of us. We say, "Oh, I have friends." Do you know what's important to them? Do you know what's going on with them? Do you know what they're struggling with? Eh, more often than not, you don't. More often, we're kind of superficial on the surface. If I go to a restaurant with a couple people I enjoy, of course I'm gonna have a good time. Like, I'm gonna eat good food, but like when the rubber hits the road, when that thing that's are really difficult, do it do I feel comfortable to ask for help? I would say sometimes that right now is is lacking, is limited, and I just wanted to share this quote
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
your thoughts, and then we'll get into final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up at a time when nobody shared on any kind
Mhm,
of a vulnerable level. Nobody in my family did. I didn't know anybody who did, and I think people didn't, and I think that they thought that that was a way to survive. My parents never talked about feelings, and I think that they thought that that was helping them to like
mhm,
just keep all that buried. And so I had to learn that. I had to learn that by kind of, going through my own dark night of the soul and realizing that actually talking and sharing with other people was the way out. It was the way through.
mhm,
And again, not like what you were saying before, like you have to tell your whole story to everybody, but in the right place at the right time to
mhm,
really allow yourself to feel the vulnerability because it's scary and it
mhm,
can feel really painful to begin with. But what I would say that I've learned on my journey is that now it feels uncomfortable not to be vulnerable in certain situations, to like stuff it and pretend I'm okay, or that I don't have an issue that I need to bring up and resolve with you, or something that I just, need to share. And what I have found so often is that I or somebody else in a group, if I or somebody else in a group goes first,
mhm,
and opens the floor to being more vulnerable and more exposed in an appropriate way. Um,
mhm.
that it gives permission to everybody, and then we're not just in proximity; we're really in community.
Yeah, I I I agree. Community there's so many layers to it, and there's so much history that um when we ignore it, when we try to just when we try to say one group is bad, it usually, well, let's just say this way, it helps no one
Right.
when we act that way. um there are certain, I would say, funny enough, when in church, or someone used to say to me, "Robert, what do you think about this?" I'm like, I got to the point, who is it? What are you talking about? Because honestly, most people try to passively kind of get opinions, and for me, that nitpicking, as small as it is, whether someone did something, we haven't developed, even adults, to interpersonal connection. I'm talking about being able to have interpersonal skills. If you have an issue, are we able to talk about it? Are we able to work through it? Um,
And do we want to work through it? I mean, I think
exactly.
that's the key. Do I just want to be right and push you out? Or
Mm-hmm.
do I actually want to work through it, hear you, be heard, and come back into some kind of connection with you?
And this, I think about that, and I think about the healing of communities. It's gonna be, it's always gonna, I feel, throughout history, is gonna be ongoing. But I do, for me, and as we spoke today, I feel that it's an important one. It's something that, just because the task is difficult, I think it's more important that we do it. We try the best we can with what we have, the knowledge we have. I try. People used to say to me, "What? Well, I'm always so busy. What can I do to help?" I'm like, "Well, when you go to the restaurant, you get the wrong order. They give you the wrong order. Be kind.
Okay.
Those waitresses and waiters work so tirelessly. Be kind to the people. Be more understanding. Someone cuts you off. Be okay. Be
Right.
safe."
Totally. Totally.
Final thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I love your final thought because I think that's what what I love to share is that we can all make a difference. And sometimes you don't even know the difference you made by just being really pleasant to someone who's having a hard time, or not giving the waitress a hard time when it's probably not even their fault, what happened. Um, but we don't know the difference we can make just by spreading kindness, by smiling at somebody, by saying, "How's your day?" Um,
Mhm.
there, and so I just feel like we can all make a difference. And I think in this world today, a lot of people feel like they can't, like the powers that be are too powerful, and the forces that are out there are beyond their ability to impact. And yet, on the grassroots level, which is very needed, we can all make our own lives and our own homes and our own communities more loving and safe and relational and kind.
Some of the best memories when I was in leader in church was one thing I used to do was when I, as the elder, I used to just make sure I'll shake the hand of everyone there. I would say,
Beautiful.
How was your week?" And it was intentionally done, obviously, and I felt connected. I
Exactly.
felt like whether I understood, some people you knew had a long-winded thing to say, but you learn. And I just felt it was something I practiced, and obviously that's an extreme example, but I would encourage those who are listening, say hi to people, say hi to people you know. And one thing I also, people who are really good at things, you may think they're really good pianists or musician, let them know. They probably
Right.
don't know. Like
Totally.
if they're exceptional at something, say that you
Totally.
appreciate them. Or if they did something nice to you, those are the small things we can do as a community.
That's right.
Remind ourselves of that. Remind them about
Absolutely.
it. So
Absolutely. I think appreciation goes a really long way.
thank you so much, Phyllis, for coming on. This was a joy. Thank you for so much. I just want to share Revive Ministries on reviveministriesfl.com. We're on YouTube, and also you can find the audio versions on the website. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries with its last quote. It's actually not a quote, it's a proverb from Native American. It says, "With all things and all things, we are relatives."
Beautiful.